That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're going to go through and look at every single matchup as we do every single week for the wide receivers. We'll throw in some tight ends here because I know that we get a lot of tight end questions on those live streams. But of course, before we dive into it, you better go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And we better go out there and give away some free Fantasy Flock Network hats for people who did just that on the last video. Our first winners for today are going to be Leonardo and AI the Human. AI the Human, thank you so much for being a part of the flock on Patreon as well. And make sure y'all just send me that email ASAP with your physical address. That way I can get your Fantasy Flock Network hat. Honestly, not fair. AI the Human is getting a Fantasy Flock Network hat anyway for being a part of the flock on Patreon. Of course, thank you so much, my friend. And y'all can always join Patreon, get an in-depth podcast breaking down your fantasy team, get access to our rest of season rankings available every single week. They are updated. Our dynasty rankings, get in the dynasty league with us. I mean, get in our group chat. There's so much going on over there on Patreon. And where there's also stuff going on is y'all know Underdog Fantasy. Make sure y'all go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK and you make your first deposit. They match you dollar for dollar on that deposit up to $100. They have fantasy drafts you can get into every single week. Like if you want to draft a team just for week 11, you can go do that on Underdog Fantasy. They also have a ton of cool player props that you can go on and bet on every single week. And I know a lot of people go, okay, well, I don't have sports betting available in my state. It's not sports betting. It's essentially DFS. If you can do DraftKings, if you can do FanDuel, I actually heard that in some states where you can't even do that, you can do Underdog. I don't know how that works. I know you can't do Underdog in like Nevada, Washington State, Louisiana, and Hawaii. And maybe like Wyoming or some super small state like that nobody's in. But nonetheless, make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK. And let's go through. Let's just dive into what we have here with these matchups. Let's start it off with the Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills. And, I mean, you don't need me to tell you. You're playing Stephon Diggs. You play Stephon Diggs every single week. Wide receiver getting 9 to 10 targets in one of the best offenses in the NFL. Right now, the Buffalo Bills, I'm surprised to see this. Like, you know, we always say, whether it's Underdog Fantasy, whether it's a sports book, they know more than us. Vegas knows more than anybody watching this video. Vegas knows more than myself. And Vegas loves Buffalo, like an unbelievable amount. Every single week, they have the Buffalo Bills with the highest implied team total. They're just all about that offense. Probably it's the passing rate that you have in there in Buffalo. But what we really have to look at is, are we going to be starting Michael Pittman? And that's a question I've actually had in a decent amount of live streams so far this week. And I understand the thought process here and maybe why we want to go through and look for a different option other than Michael Pittman. And the reason for that is with Pittman, it's a very tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. They have one of the best defenses in the NFL, whether that's their pass defense, whether that's their rush defense. In reality, there's no way in hell you could ever consider benching Michael Pittman with what he has given us, the consistency over the past 4 weeks. Like if we're going to go through, let's look at weeks 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's look at the past month with what we have had in fantasy. You're trying to just stack up exactly how productive Michael Pittman has been. Over the past 4 weeks in fantasy, here are your leaders in fantasy points per game. Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman. You're going through, you're playing Michael Pittman every single week, regardless of matchup. You can't play anybody else in Indianapolis outside of Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor. And then going over to Buffalo to speak a little bit on the secondary wide receivers that you have. You know that, I mean, my stance remains the same. 9 times out of 10, we're not playing Emmanuel Sanders. We're not playing Cole Beasley. The weeks that we are going to be playing those options is when they're going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, is when they're going up against that top offense that you can expect that game to turn into a full-blown shootout in. I'm not necessarily expecting that's going to be the case with the Indianapolis Colts. Now, one other player that we need to discuss will be Dawson Knox. Y'all know Dawson Knox has been a player that never been, saying to go through and trade for Dawson Knox over the past month just because, his value is pretty damn high. And the reason for that is the touchdown rate he's had in this offense. This is a player that coming into this past week, he was scoring a touchdown on 1 out of every 5 targets. Yes, we said that correctly. Out of every 5 targets Dawson Knox had this season, Dawson Knox was scoring a touchdown on 1 of them. Like, there's no way in hell that is ever able to maintain. So I know a lot of people now are kind of panicking on Dawson Knox after this past week for him going out there and just laying a complete goose egg. I wouldn't panic for that reason. I mean, he had the same exact role in the offense that he had previously. He did go out there and he ran a route on pretty much every single Josh Allen dropback. So the role is about the same. It's just you have to expect some pullback with the efficiency of his targets one way or another, and that's probably going to be with that touchdown rate coming down, but the volume's always been pretty low in Buffalo, so if you could look for a better option over Dawson Knox, I would. Now going over to the Baltimore Ravens and the Chicago Bears for our next team. Chicago, you cannot start a single player. You can maybe start David Montgomery. I don't even want to get into that. This is a wide receiver video. You can't start Allen Robinson. You can't start Darnell Mooney. What is so funny is we got the question in the live stream last night, and y'all know I came out a month ago and I said if I ever told anybody to start Allen Robinson again, it was your job to go through and unsubscribe to the channel and never watch another video. So I was going, oh, can we tell someone to start Allen Robinson? Should we tell him to start Adrian Peterson? I mean, it's definitely a gross spot. And then I had that little voice in the back of my head, yo, Mason, you told him to unsubscribe if you ever say to start Allen Robinson. And then I pulled it up to see exactly how bad Allen Robinson has been so far this season, because he's been bad. But at the end of the day, I mean, you hear the name Allen Robinson, you go, okay, well, he's always an option that's in play. Oh my gosh. Allen Robinson has yet to score 11 fantasy points in a game this year. He only has 2 games with over 10 fantasy points. It has been laughably bad, unbelievably bad. I mean, Justin Fields is not going to be really supporting any wide receiver to a consistent level. Darnell Mooney is the wide receiver 1 in Chicago. I mean, if you would have asked if there was any chance of that happening coming into the year, I would have laughed at you. I would have been completely dead wrong on that. But nonetheless, can't start anybody because the passing volume won't be there. And for the Baltimore Ravens, speaking of the passing volume, I was so damn wrong. Y'all know I was saying to sell Hollywood Brown over the past month, knowing that Rashad Bateman was going to expand his role. Rashad Bateman was going to create more target competition for Hollywood Brown than he's ever seen. And also, we were saying that Baltimore was not going to be able to continue to throw the ball for over 300 passing yards a game. Well, we were wrong on one of those instances. We were wrong on the passing volume in Baltimore. And I just want to come out here and say it was horrible analysis. We were looking at the historical rates that we had in 2019 and in 2020 for the playing calling in this offense when it was a completely different offense. When their number 1, number 2 wide receiver there was Willie Snead. Like, it's so much better with Rashad Bateman. They're also number 1 running backs, Devontae Freeman. Of course, they're not running the ball. I was an idiot to ever say anything else. You're playing Hollywood Brown every single week. Thank God. I mean, I kind of learned my lesson here, and we finally just got a little bit smarter, and we had the down week from Hollywood on Thursday night with Rashad Bateman going out there and having the big game. You can actually trade for Hollywood Brown at a discount right now. I would definitely be looking to do that. I think Hollywood Brown is someone that we should be going out there and chasing. Now let's go to our next game. This will be the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns. Detroit, can't start anybody. You're starting DeAndre Swift. TJ Hawkinson, I don't even know if we can start Hawkinson. Now, this was the tight end that, I mean, I was going out there and I was saying he was a must-start player every single week. I mean, the 3 weeks before the bye, he had over 30 targets in 3 weeks. I mean, he was a key member of this Detroit Lions passing attack. Now, thank God someone came out with a little nugget in our last live stream letting us know that the play caller changed in Detroit. So maybe that's a continued trend that we see. Maybe TJ Hawkinson is removed from the offense just slightly. I would still probably play Hawkinson this week, even if we're not that excited about it. You're not playing any of the receivers. Cleveland, I mean, we've said for a very long time now. We said it 2 weeks ago when everybody wanted to play Jarvis. You can't play him. We said it last week when everybody wanted to play Donovan Peoples-Jones. You can't play him. The only player that you ever play for the Cleveland Browns is whoever is the starting running back that week. Now let's go over to the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee, A.J. Brown, load him up. I mean, he's a mid-wide receiver 1. I want to be ignoring the past 2 weeks. The past 2 weeks, he went up against Jalen Ramsey and Marshawn Lattimore. I'm going to be ignoring that, expecting A.J. Brown to be a mid-wide receiver 1 in this contest. Marcus Johnson coming off a game where he had over 100 receiving yards. I think he had maybe at 100 exactly. Doesn't really matter. You're not going to be playing Marcus Johnson. If you're playing in a deep format, I'm completely fine rostering him, knowing that he will be filling in for Julio Jones. A.J. Brown's going to be the only pass catcher you're playing for Tennessee. And with Houston, you can play Brandon Cooks as a top 24 wide receiver. Right now, the spread on this game is actually 10 points between the Texans and the Titans. I expected it to maybe be a little bit larger than that. But here with Tyrod Taylor, hopefully he gets back to a little bit closer of what he was week 1 rather than this past week, of course. And with Brandon Cooks, you know he's seeing more than 25% of his team's targets. Now, our next game, the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, you're playing Justin Jefferson. You're playing Justin Jefferson as a top 10 wide receiver, even though this Green Bay Packers defense has been one of the best defenses in the NFL over the past month. You can play Adam Thielen. A big thing with Adam Thielen, y'all know, is Adam Thielen is like the easiest player to nail ever. Like, Adam Thielen is the perfect example of touchdown efficiency not really mattering and not providing consistency in fantasy football. Where, I mean, when Adam Thielen has 2 to 3 weeks where he's just completely in the gutter, when Adam Thielen comes out and he has 2 to 3 weeks where he's only scoring 4 fantasy points and not coming away with the receiving touchdown, it's the clearest thing in the world. You go buy low on Adam Thielen, and then when he's coming off the 2 to 3 week span where he has 5 touchdowns in 3 games, and you go, okay, well, this rate's not going to continue to happen. You go through and sell Adam Thielen. It's essentially, is he going to get the touchdown or not? I think that he is always in play as a top 24 wide receiver just because the red zone role that he has in Minnesota, but he's going to be very volatile. I mean, because the volume's not consistent, it's so hard to know exactly what you have with Adam Thielen, but he always has upside to be a top 5 wide receiver any given week. And then the Green Bay Packers, you play Davante Adams. And that's it. Then we don't need to talk about any other pass catcher there. Davante Adams is my wide receiver 1 this week. Our next matchup will be the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. Looks like Will Fuller, Devontae Parker not going to be playing in this game, so you can confidently fire up Jalen Waddle, who has had a fantastic role in this offense whenever you have not had Will Fuller and whenever you've not had Devontae Parker. I mean, y'all know we said to buy low on Jalen Waddle like maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, knowing that when we had those injuries, that Jalen Waddle was going to see that massive spike up. Then we said to sell high when Devontae Parker was coming back in that Buffalo game, but then Devontae Parker goes and gets hurt again. If we look at the 4 weeks that you have had with Jalen Waddle with no Fuller, no Parker, 29 fantasy points, 15 fantasy points, 16 fantasy points, and 10 fantasy points, averaging 9 targets a game during that time period. Obviously, it's a nice matchup against the New York Jets. You play Jalen Waddle. Mike Gesicki scored 0 points against the Baltimore Ravens this past week. I actually think if you want to, you can play Mike Gesicki against the New York Jets. And with the Jets, I'm not playing anybody. The issue is when you have Jamison Crowder being added back into this offense, when you have the Elijah Moore breakout, and when we have Corey Davis coming back in as well, it's so hard to assume that any one of these wide receivers is a lock for 7+ targets. And you're fine playing a team that has a crowded wide receiver core. You're fine going out there and looking at those wide receiver options. Perfect example is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The difference is between Joe Flacco and Tom Brady, we're going to probably see 100 passing yards as the gap. So it just makes a completely different scenario with the floor ceiling for like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers, whereas you're just not having anything like that in New York. I would probably be avoiding them even in a great matchup. Now, our next game, the New Orleans Saints and the Philadelphia Eagles. Horrible by me. I left off Devonta Smith out of our top 24 wide receivers. Now, I will say he probably belongs a spot. He probably deserves one just because you're looking at over the past 2 weeks. He has been fantastic. Now, speaking of unsustainable touchdown rates, that's what we've seen over the past 2 weeks. Over the past 2 weeks, he scored 3 touchdowns off of 12 targets. The efficiency is definitely going to come down. I mean, 2 weeks ago against the Chargers, he had almost 20 yards per target as well. This past week against the Broncos, he had 11. So expect that you're going to see the efficiency down. If Smith can go out there and if he can draw more volume, I think we should be excited. The issue is when he's coming off a 3-week stretch of 3, 6, and 6 targets, I mean, he's averaging 5 targets a game. He's going up against Marshawn Lattimore. So maybe I wasn't even that dumb to leave him off the top 24 wide receiver ranking. I think maybe you have to avoid him where we can, even though, I mean, maybe he's a player that we're putting over Hunter Renfrow. That was probably a bad ranking by me. Going over to the New Orleans Saints, not starting anybody. Very boring, but with the Saints, are you really going to be that confident going out there and playing Marquez Callaway? I will say, if you turn on that Saints game and you look at Marquez Callaway, like his build, he just looks like an alpha wide receiver. Like, I think maybe that's why so many people got excited about him in the preseason, because you look at just the build of Marquez Callaway, 6'2", like 205 pounds on the field. He looks like exactly how you would imagine. Like, I don't want to say Des Bryant. You know what I'm talking about. That alpha X wide receiver. In reality, if you're looking over the past month, 7, 5, 6, 4 targets. He's averaging about 5.5 targets a game. Still going to be avoiding Callaway, even with the matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, our next game, the Washington football team and the Carolina Panthers. Fire him up, Terry McLaurin. Now, y'all know with Terry McLaurin, I want to go through and I want to just address this really quick. I was getting so annoyed with a video that we had of our video where we went through and we ranked the toughest schedules for the fantasy football playoffs. And we said, okay, these are going to be the top 6 schedules that we want to be avoiding for the fantasy football playoffs. We're going to be talking about the wide receivers here and if we should just sell now or if we should hold because you're not getting enough value. So yeah, we went through and we said, okay, Terry McLaurin, he has the second toughest fantasy playoff schedule for wide receivers, but you're going to be holding him because right now his value is way too low in fantasy football. And if anything, he's a buy. Well, I guess the keyboard warriors out here going to the comment section going, oh my God, Mason, you idiot. How did you say that Terry McLaurin was a buy low yesterday and a sell high? Did you even watch the video? Did you even listen to anything? No, Terry McLaurin, this is a wide receiver that you have to consistently be starting. He has had 84 targets through 9 weeks so far. He's averaging over 9 targets a game. At the same time, I mean, there are going to be a ton of opportunities for him to go out there and just maybe get to 13, 14 targets if we also have no tight end right now for the Washington football team. It's a very tough matchup against this Carolina Panthers defense. I really would be looking to avoid it if we can. It doesn't matter whenever he's going to come out and he's going to see 30+% of his team's targets, though. And then in the case of the Carolina Panthers, DJ Moore, I honestly think the only player you can start here is Christian McCaffrey. You can't start DJ Moore. We left DJ Moore off the top 24 wide receiver list for a reason, and that is with DJ Moore over the past, I want to say 2 months now, like if you're going to remove weeks 1 through 4, because weeks 1 through 4, DJ Moore was a top 5 wide receiver. You remove those weeks and we look at DJ Moore. This is a wide receiver that is the wide receiver 54 on a points per game basis. The wide receiver 54. Now, yes, Terry McLaurin has seen a fall off like that as well. The difference is with McLaurin, the volume's been consistent. DJ Moore has been losing targets and the efficiency has cratered. Now, you're adding Cam Newton into this situation. And I know a lot of people, like, trust me, I want to get excited as well. You see Cam Newton in the Carolina jersey. You see him going out there scoring touchdowns, screaming to the camera. Yes, it's great. It's exciting. It gets your adrenaline going. At the end of the day, if you were that excited about Cam Newton as an NFL quarterback, if we thought that he had the talent to go through and elevate DJ Moore compared to what he has been as of late, wouldn't Washington have picked him up? Wouldn't New Orleans have picked him up? Wouldn't any of these other teams that needed a starting quarterback gone out there and picked up Cam Newton by now? No, Newton's going to be one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL this season. I'm rooting for the guy. I'm hoping that I'm wrong, but based on what we have seen from pretty much every NFL organization, based on the New England Patriots just moving on from him and not even just keeping him as a backup to Mac Jones, no, it's just not even a spot that we have to think about it. With DJ Moore, I'm not going to be able to start him, even though it's a good matchup against Washington. Now, our next matchup, we got the 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville, one thing I want to talk about, fire up Dan Arnold. Dan Arnold, we've been talking about this over and over and over again in those live streams. Dan Arnold has moved up to my tight end 8 in our rest of season rankings on Patreon. And since we made that move, I haven't regretted it for a second. If you're looking at Dan Arnold this season, the fantasy production doesn't jump off the page by any means. But all the underlying numbers say that Dan Arnold is in for some spike weeks sometime soon. Like if you go through, if we remove the first week that he got traded to the to the Jacksonville Jaguars, played against the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday night. That was a game he probably shouldn't even played. He was barely with that team. And we just look at every other week in Jacksonville, 8 targets, 64 receiving yards. 5 targets, 27. That's the one outlier. But then you have 10 targets, 68 receiving yards, 7 targets, 60 receiving yards, 8 targets, 67 receiving yards. Those are wide receiver numbers. You're getting that at the tight end position. Now, one thing is the production hasn't jumped off because he hasn't scored a touchdown this season. He's 6'6", and he's had 51 targets this year. I promise you, he is due for some touchdowns coming his way. I will say he will have a lower touchdown rate than league average based on fewer red zone opportunities in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense compared to others. But Dan Arnold has proven to be the number 1 receiving option for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You're playing Dan Arnold. I can't play any of these other Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers, knowing that, you're going to have a higher baseline for a wide receiver to get into your starting lineup, and it's a tougher matchup against the 49ers. With the 49ers, I'm going to be playing Deebo Samuel confidently. Deebo Samuel's been the wide receiver 2 on a points per game basis so far this season. You're going to be playing George Kittle. George Kittle is going to be a top 3 tight end here. And then with Brandon Ayuk, this is really the conversation that we need to have. It's really hard to go and evaluate Brandon Ayuk on the whole right now. Obviously, Ayuk looked like he had a pretty large role in this offense this past week against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, the issue is with Brandon Ayuk, the team didn't need to throw the ball at all. Jimmy Garoppolo didn't even get to 20 targets. And at the same time, I think we're going to be in a very similar scenario against the Jacksonville Jaguars Right now, the spread on this game is actually 6.5 points in favor of the San Francisco 49ers. I assumed it would be a little bit larger than that, if I'm going to be honest. But yeah, I'd imagine that the 49ers aren't going to be throwing the ball aggressively. They are going to be looking to run the ball in the second half. For that reason, we're probably not going to be looking to play Brandon Ayuk. Now, our next game, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Las Vegas Raiders. I think at this point, Jamar Chase, still a top 10 wide receiver. You're still playing Chase every single week. T. Higgins is going to be a weekly starter for us. We have really never moved T. Higgins out of our top 24 wide receivers because even when you had Jamar Chase popping off with the 200-yard receiving games, we were looking at that volume with T. Higgins, and it was so damn consistent. You were saying, okay, well, with T. Higgins, you just have to continue to play him. We know the passing volume is going to be there in Cincinnati with how the offense has trended over the past month or so. And if you're looking at since he came back from that shoulder injury, T. Higgins is a wide receiver that has had 42 targets through 5 weeks so far. So he's averaging 8 targets a game in Cincinnati. And I mean, very similar to Dan Arnold, we know that the touchdown rate is going to get better for T. Higgins here. He's had those, I don't even know what we just said. He's had those 40 or so targets in a scenario where he's 6'4" and hasn't scored a touchdown. That's going to get better. Higgins has been stopped at the 1, stopped at the 2 a couple weeks here. Not the best matchup in the world against the Raiders. I will be playing Higgins. And what Las Vegas is telling us to be a pretty competitive game here. I mean, right now, they have the Cincinnati Bengals as 1-point favorites. I probably would take Cincinnati -1, but my opinion doesn't matter because I've already discussed that Vegas knows more than us, so they're telling us it's going to be a competitive game. And then in the case of Las Vegas, I think you can go through and you can play Hunter Renfrow. I'm still standing by the fact that I think the loss of Henry Ruggs does not necessarily affect Hunter Renfrow's fantasy output in this offense, even though it looks like that's a laughable take for me because over the past 2 weeks, Hunter Renfrow has had some of his best fantasy weeks so far this season, and he's scored a touchdown on both of them. My argument is Henry Ruggs was never scoring touchdowns. I think the loss of Henry Ruggs, it doesn't necessarily make it like, oh my God, Henry Ruggs is no longer here. We need a red zone weapon. We're going to get the ball to Hunter Renfrow. No, he's still the same exact wide receiver he was. 49 receiving yards, 46 receiving yards. I mean, as we've discussed, you're going to expect the entire offense for Las Vegas to get a little bit worse with no Henry Ruggs. You're going to be expecting the efficiency of the targets to go down for Hunter Renfrow whenever opposing defenses are able to bring that safety down. But you're going to be expecting him to get an extra target or two a game. So Renfrow, all in all, is going to be about the same as he was previously. So I think he is still borderline low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Now our next matchup, Dallas Cowboys, Kansas City Chiefs. You play everybody you can. You go through, you play Tyreek Hill. You go through, you play Travis Kelce. You play CeeDee Lamb. You play Amari Cooper. You even play Dalton Schultz. Y'all know Dalton Schultz. We've been talking about the fact that with Michael Gallup coming back in, Michael Gallup's going to be almost erasing Dalton Schultz from this Dallas Cowboys offense. But this game against the Kansas City Chiefs, a little bit of a different story here. Right now, you actually have this as the highest over-under according to Las Vegas, and it's not even close this week. This is going to be a full-blown shootout. I even think for that reason, you can consider Gallup. With Michael Gallup, we were telling nobody to play him last week against Atlanta, even though you were expecting that the Dallas Cowboys were going to go out there and put up a zillion points based on Las Vegas having them with the highest implied team total last week. But at the same time, you're never really taking the risk on that player coming back from that long-term ankle injury until we actually see them on the field, just like we weren't playing Jerry Jeudy his first week back. I think this is now the week where you can consider playing Gallup. Now, our next game, we'll have the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks. Looks like we may have Kyler Murray. We may not have DeAndre Hopkins. This is going to be something I have to continue to give updates to as we go through the week. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'd say if Kyler plays and Hopkins doesn't, you play Christian Kirk and you play AJ Green. Now, if both Hopkins and Kyler play, I'm probably just going to be playing Hopkins with Christian Kirk and AJ Green. They each have spike week potential, but at the same time, they'll be just pretty volatile and actually trying to give them a high floor. It's not going to be able to be the case. Zach Ertz you can play as well. Zach Ertz way better in Arizona than I initially thought he was going to be. At the same time, you've had no DeAndre Hopkins, so there are targets available. Now, the Seattle Seahawks, you're going all in on betting on the bounce back from Seattle here. I think that with Russell Wilson, we have a decade of him being one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL compared to this one past week where he was horrendous. Not making any excuses with the finger. I'm just going to go through. I'm betting on the Seattle Seahawks to have a bounce back, play Russell Wilson, also at the same time, play Tyler Lockett, play DK Metcalf, no hesitation. Now, our next game, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have a horrible run defense, a great pass defense. So for that reason, you're not that excited to play any of these Pittsburgh Steelers options. I would go through, you play Deontay Johnson, though. Deontay Johnson going to get double-digit targets with Ben Roethlisberger coming back in. Claypool, not really going to be wanting to play him coming back from the injury in this matchup in particular. In the case of the Los Angeles Chargers, I did not rank Mike Williams as a top 24 wide receiver this week. It's a tough matchup. I think with Mike Williams, maybe the role's changing slightly in Los Angeles. You play Keenan Allen, obviously. Allen consistently getting 9 to 10 targets a game, as we've talked about all season. Keenan Allen has yet to have a week where he has not scored double-digit fantasy points, so you're going to be playing Keenan Allen. I think with Mike Williams, it's a little bit of a different story, though. Now, our last game, we have the New York Giants and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'll say you cannot play anybody for the New York Giants. We've had a lot of people saying, should I pick up Kadarius Toney from the waiver wire? Hell yes. Hell yes. Kadarius Toney needs to be rostered. Kadarius Toney is a rookie wide receiver that has had 189 receiving yards in a game. Where else are you finding that kind of upside from the waiver wire? You're rostering Kadarius Toney. You're not playing him in a tough matchup against the very good Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And we're not going to be going through and playing Kenny Galladay. We're not playing anybody for the New York Giants. I would even kind of avoid playing Saquon Barkley. Now, y'all know I love Barkley for the long term. I think Barkley is a great buy low. He's going to be a great buy low after this Tampa Bay Buccaneers game because I'd imagine that the Buccaneers are actually able to shut down this New York Giants offense. And with Tampa, it doesn't really matter when Tom Brady is essentially a lock every single week, especially when you have all his weapons to throw for over 300 passing yards. So, I mean, you're going to be playing Evans, Chris Godwin. It's just what is the real floor and ceiling combination. Now, of course, thank you so much for coming out, checking out this video. If you have not already, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, letting me know how stupid I am. Subscribe to the channel. And also go sign up for Underdog Fantasy over there on Underdog Fantasy. When you make your first deposit with promo code FLOCK, you have access to all those player props you saw on the screen. At the same time, get into some fantasy drafts, and they'll match you dollar for dollar on that deposit up to $100. So please take advantage of that. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.